Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, The Whispering Tide. Hercule Poirot, that most precise and particular of gentlemen, was finishing his morning routine when the telegram arrived. His immaculate moustache had just received its final touch of grooming wax, his tie was aligned perfectly, and his shoes gleamed with a luster that could easily reveal a person's moral character, if one believed Poirot's own philosophy about polished leather. The knock on the door was soft, hesitant. His valet, George, entered with the muted efficiency Poirot admired. "A telegram for you, sir," he announced. Poirot accepted it with a small nod. "Merci, George's. Let us hope it contains news that does not disturb the harmony of the morning." But harmony was seldom the companion of urgent telegrams. The message was brief. "Monsieur Poirot, I beg your assistance. A man has vanished under deeply troubling circumstances. Madder Cove is not what it seems. I fear something terrible is coming. Lillian Seaborn." Poirot tapped the edge of the paper thoughtfully. He had met Miss Seaborn only once, at a lecture in London on educational reform. She struck him as sensible, steady, and most importantly, not prone to melodrama. If she was frightened, then something serious must indeed be afoot. "A small coastal village," Poirot murmured. "Remote. Quiet. And yet trouble finds even the most tranquil corners." Within 3 hours he was aboard a southbound train, heading toward the sea. The journey carried him through rolling fields, scattered farms, and eventually thin roads twisting through cliffs. The air grew colder, sharper. Poirot drew his coat closer as the train slowed into a tiny station marked simply Madder Cove. The platform was empty save for one woman, tall and composed despite a certain fragility around the eyes. Miss Lillian Seaborn. She approached with visible relief. "Monsieur Poirot. Thank you for coming so quickly." Poirot inclined his head. "For a lady of your calm judgment to send such a plea, mademoiselle, I could do nothing else. This way, please. I fear we have little time." As they left the station, Poirot studied the village. Madder Cove was quaint, almost picturesque. Rows of weathered stone cottages hugged a narrow road, their roofs glistening faintly with sea frost. Beyond them stretched the open sea, vast, turbulent, and crowned by dramatic cliffs of reddish stone. A cold wind swept past them, carrying an eerie, low moaning sound. Poirot paused. "What is this noise, mademoiselle?" "It is like the whisper of a ghost." Miss Seaborn managed a faint smile. "The villagers call it the whispering tide. When the wind hits the caves at a certain angle, it creates that sound. They treat it as a warning." "A warning of what?" Her expression tightened. "Of danger. Misfortune. Bad omens. You will understand soon." Poirot tucked the information away. Superstition often hid practicality beneath its cloak. As they walked toward the village square, Miss Seaborn finally explained the heart of the matter. "The man who has vanished is Arthur Penrose, a botanist who came here 2 months ago to study a rare plant called Madder's vein. He was harmless, polite, and intensely focused on his research. Then one may assume he found something, or someone," Poirot suggested softly. Miss Seaborn nodded gravely. "3 days ago, Arthur told me he believed he was being followed. He looked pale, frightened, even. He said he had discovered something he wished he had not." Poirot raised a brow. "Did he specify the nature of this discovery?" "No. He refused to speak of it openly. He only said, 'The cliffs hide more than flowers.' The next morning, he was gone. Poirot considered this. And the village? She sighed. Refuses to talk. The people here are close-knit and wary of outsiders. They whisper behind closed doors, they lock their windows at night, and they look at me with pity I do not understand. Even the constable insists Arthur merely wandered off. And you disagree? Absolutely. Arthur was not a careless man. He kept meticulous notes. His absence is unnatural. They reached a small stone cottage, the place Arthur had been renting. Poirot entered, noting instantly the carefully ordered layout. Books on botany lined the shelves. Drawers were closed with mathematical precision. The writing desk was spotless. Poirot touched the top of a stack of journals, then lifted one. Mademoiselle, this room is tidy in a way that is not natural. It is tidy in the way a tidiness becomes a disguise. Miss Seaborn blinked. You mean someone searched it? Poirot pointed to the bookshelf. Observe the space for a missing book. It was removed carefully, for no dust was disturbed around it. And yet the notebooks are untouched. He crossed the room and ran a finger along the windowsill. He frowned. Fresh mud. But no rainfall in days, yes. She nodded. Then someone entered through here, Poirot said quietly. Miss Seaborn clasped her hands. Arthur said he feared someone would break in. Poirot glanced around once more. A man had vanished. A rare plant with unknown properties grew on the cliffs. A village steeped in superstition was hiding something. And the sea moaned like an old sorrow. Poirot stepped outside, and Miss Seaborn led him toward the cliffs. As they approached, the wind intensified, whipping waves against the rocks with a fury that felt almost personal. The cliffs towered above them, red and immense, marked by deep crevices like old wounds. Poirot looked upward. Tell me, mademoiselle, why does the village fear these cliffs? Because people have disappeared here before. Poirot stopped walking. Before? Yes. Over decades. Always those who come searching for Madder's vein. Poirot lifted his chin. The sea roared. The tide whispered. And the mystery deepened. My little grey cells, he murmured, are most intrigued. Miss Seaborn shivered. Monsieur Poirot, do you believe Arthur is still alive? Poirot did not answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on a jagged silhouette at the cliff summit. Something, or someone, stood watching them. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, precise. Mademoiselle, I believe the truth is here. And we shall find it, no matter how deeply it is buried beneath the rocks. Chapter 2, The Echo in the Dark. The journey to Madder Cove by motorcar was long, winding, and intermittently swallowed by pockets of fog rising from the marshlands. Hercule Poirot sat with his hands neatly folded over his lap, observing the desolate scenery with a quiet attentiveness. Arthur Mallow, at the wheel, stole glances at him every so often, as though expecting a verdict or pronouncement. You have been unusually silent, Monsieur Poirot, Mallow remarked. Is the scenery uninspiring? Poirot's lips twitched in amusement. Not at all, my friend. It is contemplative. I find that landscape often reflects the state of affairs into which one is being drawn. Madder Cove has the look of a place that conceals much beneath the surface. Too true, Mallow muttered, his grip tightening on the wheel. It was nearly dusk when they arrived. The Manor, Harrowden Hall, stood perched on a rise overlooking the restless sea. The building looked both dignified and weary, as though it had absorbed the troubles of each generation that lived within it. Wind rattled the windows and carried the faint scent of salt and wild thyme. Lady Harrow herself awaited them at the grand entrance. Tall and elegantly dressed in dark blue velvet, she carried herself with the poise of a woman determined to maintain control despite the chaos around her. Monsieur Poirot, she greeted warmly, though her eyes betrayed sleepless nights. Thank you for coming. Please, come inside before the wind blows us all away. Inside, the hall was dimly lit, with a large portrait of Lord Harrow dominating the far wall. The late botanist's expression was stern yet thoughtful, his gaze fixed on an unseen horizon. Poirot paused before it. He has a look of determination, Poirot observed. Lady Harrow sighed. He was not a man who gave up easily. That is why his death troubles me so deeply. She led them to the drawing-room where a fire fought against the encroaching chill. 3 people rose as they entered. My nephew, Julian Harrow, she introduced first. Julian was a man in his early 30s, good-looking but pale, with shadows under his eyes that hinted at strain or guilt. He assisted my late husband in his botanical work. Assisted, Julian repeated softly, as though the word amused or irritated him. Lady Harrow cleared her throat. This is Dr. Evelyn Marsh, our local physician. Dr. Marsh, a sharp-featured woman with a composed expression, gave Poirot a curt nod. Her presence exuded competence, though also a guardedness that caught Poirot's attention. And finally, Lady Harrow continued, Mr. Leonard Graves, the estate steward. Graves was tall, stooped, with a face that seemed permanently etched with fatigue. He bowed respectfully. Monsieur Poirot, he said. We have all been waiting for your insight. Poirot inclined his head. Then let us begin. I understand Lord Harrow died from ingesting the sap of a plant known as Madder's vein. Tell me, how widely was this plant known among you? Julian stepped forward. The plant was my uncle's obsession. A rare species with unusual chemical properties. He kept samples locked in the greenhouse cabinet. Only he and I possessed the key. Poirot raised a brow. Only 2 keys? That is interesting. Julian stiffened. Are you implying something? Poirot smiled gently. I imply nothing yet. I merely listen. Dr. Marsh interjected. Lord Harrow's symptoms matched severe plant toxicity. But I found the quantity in his system suspicious. Too much for an accidental brush with sap. Lady Harrow winced. He would never have been careless. And the greenhouse? Poirot asked. Graves shifted uncomfortably. There was an incident the night before. A break-in. Lady Harrow turned sharply. You did not tell me that. I did not wish to upset you further, my lady. Poirot narrowed his eyes. What exactly occurred? Graves explained that someone had forced the latch on the greenhouse door. Tools were disturbed. Soil had been scattered as though someone had been searching for something. But nothing appeared stolen, at least nothing he recognized. Julian clenched his jaw. I told you, Uncle suspected someone was after his research. He said so only a week ago. Lady Harrow shook her head. He tended to dramatize when he was absorbed in his work. Poirot observed quietly. Perhaps, madam. Or perhaps he sensed danger. Silence fell over the room. Poirot stood. If you would permit me, I should like to examine the greenhouse at once. The light is fading, but the darkness, it often reveals what daylight conceals. Lady Harrow blinked. At this hour? Poirot smiled lightly. The hour does not concern Hercule Poirot. A lantern was brought, and Graves led Poirot and Mallow through the gardens. The wind hissed through the branches, and the sea crashed below, its rhythm unsettlingly irregular. The greenhouse, when they reached it, loomed like a glass cage. One pane was cracked. The metal latch bore scratches. Poirot bent low. Fresh, he murmured. Within the last 2 nights. Inside, the greenhouse felt warm, humid, and faintly metallic with the smell of rare plants. Poirot moved slowly, studying the shelves, the soil, the discarded gloves. "Ah," he murmured, spotting a muddy footprint near the back wall. "This is no boot of a gardener. Far too narrow. Perhaps a lady's shoe, yes." Graves paled. "But who would?" Poirot held up a finger. "We do not leap to conclusions. We note, and we wait." He studied the locked cabinet containing the samples of Madder's vein. The lock showed no damage. He looked at the keyhole, something glimmered. Poirot carefully extracted a tiny red fibre. "Interesting," he whispered. "Very interesting." As they stepped outside again, the wind rose sharply. The lantern flickered. Then, suddenly, a sharp crack echoed across the cliffs. Not thunder. Not a falling branch. A gunshot. Mallow startled. "Good heavens!" Poirot turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "Come, mon ami. The night has decided to speak." They hurried toward the source of the sound. The shadows stretched long and menacing across the path. When they rounded the hedge near the east wing, the lantern light caught a figure slumped against the stone wall. It was Julian Harrow. Blood stained his sleeve, and his face was twisted in shock. Poirot knelt beside him. "Monsieur Harrow." "Who fired at you?" Julian gripped Poirot's arm weakly. I saw someone, near the cliffs, a figure." Poirot leaned in. "A man?" "A woman." Julian's eyes fluttered. "I couldn't tell, but they knew." "Knew what?" Poirot pressed. Julian tried to speak, but only a ragged whisper escaped. Then his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed into unconsciousness. Poirot's expression hardened. "The plot thickens, mon ami," he murmured. "And the night has only begun speaking." Chapter 3, Whispers Beneath the Waves. Julian Harrow was carried to the manor by Leonard Graves and Arthur Mallow, the former trembling with shock, the latter steady and practical. Dr. Evelyn Marsh hurried ahead, instructing the housemaid to prepare bandages, hot water, and her medical case. The hall, once quiet with melancholy, now hummed with tension as Lady Harrow appeared at the top of the staircase. "Julian!" "What has happened?" she gasped, rushing down. "A gunshot, madam," Poirot said gently. "He is wounded but alive. Dr. Marsh will attend to him." Poirot watched Dr. Marsh intently as she examined Julian on the sofa. She worked with swift efficiency, though her jaw tightened with each passing second. "It is a deep graze," she announced, wiping her hands. "No vital organs harmed. He will wake soon. Shock is the greater danger." Lady Harrow pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. "But who or why?" Poirot lifted a hand politely. "That is what we must understand, madam. But please, allow Dr. Marsh to work without distraction." Lady Harrow nodded, though distress clouded her eyes. Poirot's own gaze drifted to Julian's hand. It was clenched tightly, fingers curled around something. Very gently, Poirot prized them open. A torn scrap of paper lay inside. Only 2 words were scrawled upon it. "Cliff Cellar." Poirot did not reveal this immediately. Instead, he folded the paper neatly and slipped it into his pocket. There was, as he liked to say, a right moment for every revelation. Half an hour later, Julian was resting more peacefully. Dr. Marsh insisted on remaining nearby. Lady Harrow called everyone into the drawing room, except Julian. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, breath trembling, "if there is danger, real danger, why was my husband targeted?" "And now Julian? What connects these events?" Poirot took a seat, fingertips pressed together. Arthur Mallow stood discreetly behind him. It is my belief, Madam, Poirot began, that these events are deeply connected to Lord Harrow's research into the plant called Madder's vein. Lady Harrow faltered. Surely you are not suggesting someone would kill for a plant? Poirot gave a small shrug. One does not kill for the plant, Madam. One kills for what the plant can offer. Lord Harrow was on the verge of an important discovery. Something that perhaps others wished to control. Graves stepped forward. But who? Only Julian and Lord Harrow understood the research fully. And perhaps, Poirot added quietly, someone else wished to obtain that knowledge without permission. Dr. Marsh's voice cut in, sharper than intended. You mean an outsider? Poirot did not look at her directly. Possibly. He rose. I should now like to see Lord Harrow's private study. Lady Harrow hesitated. It has not been touched since that night. Excellent, Poirot replied softly. Then it may speak clearly. The study was on the first floor, a long room overlooking the sea. Even in daylight, it held a shadowed, uneasy silence. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes on rare plants, toxins, and chemical extraction. Poirot moved with delicate precision. Observe, Arthur, he murmured. How the dust has settled on everything except this. He pointed to a small writing desk drawer, slightly misaligned. Old dust framed the edges, except for a clear streak where something had been handled. Inside the drawer were numerous botanical sketches, some half-finished. But what caught Poirot's attention was a small metal lockbox. And this, it seems, once held something precious. He showed Mallow the box empty. Graves frowned. Lord Harrow kept notes in that box. Notes he did not want anybody but Julian to see. Then where are they now? Poirot asked softly. No one answered. Poirot walked to the window, gazing out at the cliffs. Waves crashed violently below. From this vantage point one could just glimpse a small outcropping where the cliff dipped, forming a hollow. It reminded him of the words on the scrap he had taken from Julian's hand. Cliff cellar. Poirot turned back to the others. Miss Amos, the time has come for a little walk. The wind whipped fiercely as they approached the cliffs. Lady Harrow had remained behind. Dr. Marsh and Graves accompanied Poirot and Mallow. The sky was low and heavy, threatening rain. Graves led the way along the narrow path. Mind your step, he warned. The tide rises fast. Poirot, who walked with great caution, suddenly paused. You said earlier, he addressed Graves, that no items were missing from the greenhouse. To the best of my knowledge, Graves replied. And yet Lord Harrow's lockbox was emptied. Graves swallowed. I knew nothing of that. Poirot's gaze remained fixed on him a moment too long. Then he turned to Dr. Marsh. Tell me, Doctor, you were quite swift today in treating Monsieur Julian. Almost as though you were prepared. Dr. Marsh stiffened. It is my duty. I am always prepared. Of course, Poirot murmured, though the tone suggested he was filing away her reaction for later. They descended further until a small, weather-beaten shed came into view, half collapsed, leaning into the cliffside. There, Graves said. That used to be the old storage cellar for tools. The cliff erosion made it unsafe. Poirot studied it. Unsafe places, Madame Nature creates them often. But they are useful to those who wish to hide. He moved closer. The shed door hung crookedly, its hinges rusted. Poirot lifted his lantern. The interior was dark, smelled of damp stone and salt. Broken tools lay scattered about. But something glinted near the far wall. Poirot approached, and froze. A wooden crate lay smashed open. Within it were glass vials and small jars, scientific specimens. Arthur, Poirot whispered, "Bring the light closer." Mallow obeyed. The jars were labelled in Lord Harrow's handwriting. Madder's vein, sap concentrate. Madder's vein, compound A. Madder's vein, compound B. All empty. Dr. Marsh inhaled sharply. Someone was experimenting. Poirot nodded. Yes. And not Lord Harrow. For see, these jars were opened with great haste. Lord Harrow's hand was steady, precise. Graves looked horrified. Then who? Poirot lifted a small piece of torn cloth caught in a nail on the crate. Red. A tiny thread, matching the one found inside the greenhouse cabinet. He pocketed it. Suddenly a voice echoed from outside. "Monsieur Poirot." "There is something else." It was Mallow, standing near the shed entrance. Poirot hurried out. Mallow pointed to footprints, fresh, leading away toward the steeper part of the cliff. But these footprints were distinct. They were deeper, closer together, made by someone running. "Someone was here not long before us," Mallow said. "Very recently." Poirot nodded gravely. "Yes." And they knew these cliffs well. The wind rose. Far below, the sea crashed with a thunderous finality. Poirot looked up at the darkening sky. "There is someone," he murmured, "who does not wish these secrets to be uncovered." Dr. Marsh looked pale. "Poirot, do you think they will try again?" Poirot's eyes glimmered. "Madam, I do not think it. I am certain." He turned toward the manor. "And so, Miss Amis, we must be quicker than the killer. For they are already several moves ahead." Chapter 4: The Greenhouse Conspiracy. The morning after their perilous exploration of the cliff cellar, Madder Cove awoke to a pall of tension that seemed almost tangible. The wind had died down, but the sea still roared with relentless energy, as though mourning secrets it could not release. Poirot dressed with his customary precision, moustache waxed to a perfect curve, tie aligned meticulously, and descended to breakfast. His eyes, always alert, missed nothing. Miss Lillian Seaborn was already in the dining room, fidgeting with the edge of her napkin. Lady Harrow arrived shortly thereafter, bearing the weight of both worry and dignity. Dr. Marsh and Graves were present as well, seated formally, though uneasily. Even Arthur Mallow had the air of a man who had glimpsed shadows that others would not see. Poirot's keen eyes swept over them. He noted the way Lady Harrow's fingers trembled slightly as she poured tea, the tension in Dr. Marsh's shoulders, and the faint glances Graves exchanged with Mallow, as though they were silently agreeing on some unspoken narrative. Each clue, subtle though it was, would later prove invaluable. "I trust," Poirot began, in that calm, deliberate tone that commanded attention, "that all are aware of the events of last night. The cliff cellar, the smashed crate, and the discovery of the missing specimens are matters that demand careful reflection." He paused to let the weight of his words settle. "The matter is not merely disappearance or theft. Someone wishes these secrets buried." Lady Harrow looked startled. "But, Monsieur Poirot, who would dare?" Poirot lifted a finger, his expression mild yet piercing. "That is precisely what we must discover. But first, I propose we examine the scene of the greenhouse incident once again. Time and light often reveal details the night conceals." Graves' lips pressed into a thin line. "Do you wish us to accompany you?" "Only if necessary," Poirot replied. "Precision is my ally. Superfluous observers may obscure the truth." By the time they reached the greenhouse, sunlight had begun to stream through the glass panes, illuminating droplets of condensation clinging to the interior like tiny crystals. The greenhouse was more revealing in daylight, the scattered soil, the slightly ajar cabinet, the faint traces of red clay on the floorboards, all of which Poirot had noted previously but now saw in new light. He crouched to examine the soil more closely. Observe, he murmured, pointing to a footprint pressed lightly into the mud. Too narrow for a man's shoe. Perhaps a woman's heel. Yet the tread suggests urgency. Someone not accustomed to stealth attempted to move quickly, perhaps to conceal something or, more likely, to seize an opportunity. Graves cleared his throat nervously. You think it is Lady Harrow? Poirot did not reply immediately. He moved to the cabinet, inspecting the lock. There was no forced entry this time, only subtle scratches around the keyhole. He held up a small red thread that clung stubbornly to the metal. Someone handled this lock carefully, but they carried a trace of soil or clay with them. Very small, very precise. It matches the thread found in the cliff cellar. Dr. Marsh leaned forward. Monsieur Poirot, you believe the same person is responsible for both incidents? Yes, Poirot confirmed, or at the very least, that the person acted with deliberate coordination. Observe how the scratches on the lock indicate a tool used with hesitation, skill, yes, but also nervousness. Our culprit is clever enough to plan, yet fearful enough to leave subtle marks. Poirot's gaze turned to the row of jars previously disturbed in the cellar. He noted their absence from the greenhouse shelf. These jars, empty now, were carefully removed. The question is, for what purpose? One could experiment, or one could destroy evidence. He tapped one finger lightly against his lips. A key question, Miss Amis, is motive. And motive is never accidental. Lady Harrow spoke quietly. Monsieur Poirot, you spoke of someone removing evidence. But surely the village would have noticed if a stranger took the jars. Ah, madam, Poirot replied, you assume a stranger must have committed this act. But the most dangerous adversary often wears a familiar face. Someone we trust, or believe we trust. He tilted his head. And, as we have already observed, familiarity breeds opportunity. Graves frowned. Are you suggesting it could be one of us? Not merely suggesting, Poirot corrected gently. Merely observing facts. And the facts are, the greenhouse was breached. The lockbox emptied. The jars removed. Traces of red clay persist in two distinct locations, the greenhouse and the cliff cellar. These are not coincidences. Mallow shifted uneasily. And Julian? Do you think he is in danger again? Mais oui, Poirot said softly. The individual who desires to conceal these secrets has demonstrated both daring and foresight. They will not hesitate if further obstruction occurs. Poirot moved toward the far wall of the greenhouse. A thin line of sunlight caught a corner of the glass where a subtle scratch marred the surface. He knelt, brushing away the dirt carefully. A tiny fragment of torn paper stuck there, almost invisible. He examined it with a lens. Ah, he whispered, here is a clue perhaps overlooked by all but the most observant eye. Note the fiber embedded in the paper, it is linen, dyed a deep crimson. This color is unusual. Not typical of work gloves or clothing. This is deliberate, something chosen, perhaps for concealment or misdirection. Lady Harrow gasped softly. Crimson? That matches the gloves I wore yesterday. But I assure you, Monsieur Poirot, I would never. I never? Poirot held up a hand. We do not accuse. We merely collect facts. Consider, madam, the combination of elements, the footprint, the scratches, the thread, the paper fragment, and the empty jars. Each is a small note in a symphony. Only when we hear them together can we perceive the full melody. Dr. Marsh leaned closer. Monsieur Poirot, you mentioned misdirection. Are you saying someone wanted us to look the wrong way? Exactly, Poirot replied, eyes glinting. The perpetrator is clever. A deliberate distraction. One footstep leading us toward fear, another toward discovery. But the genius of the crime is that each misdirection contains a kernel of truth. One must sift carefully. Poirot straightened and walked to the door. It is my belief that we should examine the surrounding paths once more. The cliff cellar, the greenhouse, the manor, all are interconnected. And it is in the intersections that the secret waits. Outside, the morning mist began to lift, revealing the village below. Children ran along the narrow streets, oblivious to the tension that gripped the adults. The sea churned, white caps breaking like a relentless drumbeat, as if echoing the urgency of the investigation. Poirot spoke quietly to Mallow and Graves. "Notice, Miss Amis, how isolation plays a role. A village cut off by cliffs and sea is a perfect stage for concealment. The tides are the clock, the wind the messenger. And our adversary moves between them with cunning." Graves shivered. "Monsieur Poirot, do you really believe someone in the village is responsible?" "I do not merely believe," Poirot corrected. "I observe. An observation leads inevitably to conclusion. But we must proceed with caution. Fear clouds judgment, and panic is the friend of the guilty." At that moment, a shadow flitted across the distant hillside. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Or there. A silhouette. Observe its manner of movement. Quick, deliberate, yet cautious. Someone who knows these cliffs intimately. Someone who wishes to remain unseen. This is no accident. Our quarry is already among us. Lady Harrow's voice trembled. "Monsieur Poirot, can you protect Julian? He is still weak." Poirot's expression softened. "Madam, do not fear. With care and vigilance, we shall safeguard him. But prudence is required at every step. The game is afoot, and only the little grey cells will reveal the path." He turned to the group, poised, deliberate. "We must prepare for the next encounter. For our adversary does not rest. And when they act again, the consequences may be more severe." The wind picked up once more, carrying the scent of salt and something faintly bitter, like crushed leaves, or perhaps danger. Poirot inhaled deeply, his eyes sweeping the horizon. "Yes," he murmured to himself. "The tide whispers, the cliffs conceal, and I shall listen to both. For within these whispers lies the truth, waiting to be uncovered." And with that, Hercule Poirot's mind began to weave the first threads of a plan, a careful, precise strategy to unmask the hidden hand before the next misstep cost another life. Chapter 5: The Painting and the Poison. The morning fog clung stubbornly to Madder Cove, seeping into the narrow streets and curling around the cottages like ghostly fingers. Even the relentless sea seemed muffled, the roar of waves softened by the mist. Poirot stood by the drawing-room window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the world beyond the manor as if it were a stage, each villager an object to clue in an elaborate play. Miss Lillian Seaborn entered quietly, carrying a small package. She seemed tense, as if the weight of responsibility rested upon her slight shoulders. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, voice low, "I believe I have something that may aid your investigation. Something that cannot be overlooked." Poirot turned with his signature elegance. "Ah, mademoiselle, the little grey cells are never idle when new evidence arrives. Pray, show me this object." From the package, she produced a canvas wrapped carefully in brown paper. Poirot's eyes narrowed in interest. "A painting?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. "Nina Crestwell, the artist staying near the cliffs, sent it to me. She claims she painted it unconsciously, capturing something she did not realize until later. She was near the cliffs the day Arthur vanished." Poirot unwrapped the canvas with delicate fingers, revealing a seascape. The painting was exquisite, waves rolling with ghostly light, jagged cliffs towering above a hidden cove. But Poirot, trained to see beyond surface beauty, noticed a detail others might miss, a faint, almost imperceptible silhouette of two figures in heated discussion atop a rocky ledge. Poirot held the painting at arm's length. "Observe, mademoiselle. Note the posture, the tension, one figure leaning forward aggressively, the other recoiling. The brushstrokes are quick, nervous. This was not intentional, yet it is revealing." The artist's mind recorded a moment she did not consciously perceive. Miss Seaborn nodded. "She is certain it is the day before Arthur disappeared." Poirot tapped a finger lightly against his lips. "Ah, so our timeline gains clarity. The confrontation occurred before Arthur's absence. And this may explain the urgency, the fear he expressed. But who were the two?" Before anyone could answer, Graves entered, his face pale. "Monsieur Poirot, there is news from the inn. A vial washed ashore on the beach near the cliffs. A local child found it. They say it smells strange." Poirot's eyes lit up with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Bring it at once." When Graves returned, he handed Poirot a small glass vial, its cork slightly loosened. Poirot examined it carefully. Inside was a fine, reddish powder, fine as sand. "Interesting," he murmured, "and highly dangerous. A concentrated extract of Madder's vein, perhaps one of Lord Harrow's experimental compounds. A potent toxin if administered incorrectly." He sniffed the vial lightly, wincing. "Yes, unmistakable. Its presence here is deliberate. Someone has been testing it, or attempting to frighten others." Miss Seaborn shivered. "Do you think someone tried to harm Arthur with it?" "It is very possible," Poirot said softly. "Or perhaps it was meant to warn or distract. A clever misdirection. But consider, if Arthur was in danger before his disappearance, this vial could be a message or a test of courage." Mallow, who had been silent until now, frowned. "So the clues are stacking. The torn page, the painting, the vial. But what does it all mean?" Poirot's gaze turned inward, reflective. "It means that our adversary is meticulous. They calculate, they experiment, and they act with precision. Arthur did not vanish by accident. He was confronted, perhaps threatened, and the events of the last few days are threads of a deliberate design." Dr. Marsh, who had remained quiet, spoke now. "Monsieur Poirot, someone had access to the laboratory and the greenhouse. Could they have prepared the toxin there?" "Indeed," Poirot confirmed. "And the fact that it appeared on the beach suggests an individual familiar with the tide, the terrain, and the timing. Only someone who understands Madder Cove's geography could have executed this so flawlessly." Poirot paused, then walked toward the mantelpiece, adjusting his tie as he considered the evidence. "The question we must now answer is simple: who benefits from Arthur's disappearance and the concealment of Madder's vein? Who fears exposure?" Graves hesitated. "You suspect someone here in the manor?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "I suspect, Leonard, that the culprit is closer than anyone imagines. And not merely clever, but daring, bold, yet anxious. Observe carefully, Miss Amis. Anxiety is the fingerprint of guilt." He returned to the painting, studying it again. "Note also the cliff in the background. A hidden ledge, barely visible. This is the key location, where confrontation occurs, where fear is realized, and possibly where Arthur's path diverged." Miss Seaborn whispered, "Do you think he fell? Or was he taken?" Poirot smiled gently. "Ah, mademoiselle, we do not guess. We observe. And from observation, deduction arises." He held up the vial. "The presence of this substance, the timing of the confrontation, the location suggested by the painting, all suggest that someone intended a controlled encounter. And the powder, it is a warning, a test, or a signal. Someone wants to manage Arthur's actions." Mallow frowned. And if Arthur survived? If he's hiding? Poirot nodded thoughtfully. A clever suggestion. But consider Arthur's disappearance, the faint traces in the cliff cellar, the tampering with specimens, all indicate human intervention. Not mere wandering or hiding. Someone wanted him removed, or at least constrained. The challenge is to discover by whom and why. Dr. Marsh leaned closer, lowering her voice. Monsieur Poirot, you have studied human nature more than anyone I know. Do you believe the person here among us is capable of murder? Poirot's gaze sharpened. Madam, to act with poison, to manipulate events so deliberately, one must possess not only courage, but the cold calculation to act regardless of consequence. It is not impossible. And, regrettably, the evidence suggests we are dealing with precisely such a mind. Miss Seaborn's hands trembled. Then we must protect Julian. And Arthur, if he is still alive. Poirot inclined his head. Absolutely. And yet, protection alone is not sufficient. We must lure our adversary into action, or mistake. And to do this, we must understand their motive, their fears, their limitations. He turned to the others. We will begin with subtle observation. Watch behavior, note hesitation, measure reactions. Every gesture, every glance may reveal more than speech ever could. And above all, pay attention to the items that appear out of place. The smallest clue is often the most telling. At that moment, a faint knock at the door interrupted them. It was the innkeeper, Mrs. Elkins, who stepped in hesitantly, a note in her hand. Monsieur Poirot, she said, voice trembling, this was left at the inn for you. Anonymous, but the handwriting, it is shaky. Poirot took the note and unfolded it carefully. On the page, in uneven letters, was a single message. Do not trust the walls. The tide sees all. He folded the note with deliberate care, tucking it into his waistcoat. Ah, he murmured, the individual is aware that we are observing. A warning, yes, but also a challenge. They test our resolve, our cleverness. Miss Seaborn shivered. Monsieur Poirot, what shall we do? Poirot's eyes gleamed with determination. We continue, mademoiselle. Watch, observe, deduce. Each day, each encounter, brings us closer to the truth. And when the time is right, the hidden hand will be revealed. Chapter 6, Shadows at Midnight. Night had fallen over Madder Cove, wrapping the cliffs and Manor in a dense, shrouding darkness. The wind had picked up again, rattling windows and moaning through the trees, carrying the faint salt tang of the restless sea. Even the normally comforting hearth of Harrowden Hall seemed to cast elongated shadows, transforming familiar furniture into sinister shapes. Hercule Poirot sat alone in the drawing room, his posture perfectly straight, hands resting lightly on the arm of his chair. He was reviewing the events of the past days in his mind, turning over every detail, no matter how small. Each minor clue, the red thread, the torn scrap of paper, the vial of Madder's vein, the brush of footprints near the cliff cellar, was a note in a symphony of crime that had yet to reveal its final composition. Miss Lillian Seaborn entered quietly, carrying a tray with tea. Her face was pale and drawn. Monsieur Poirot, she whispered, I do not like the look of the Manor tonight. I feel as though something is watching. Poirot inclined his head slightly. Ah, mademoiselle, you are perceptive. Fear, when properly observed, is most useful. It tells us what the guilty wish to conceal. She placed the tray before him. Do you really think they will try again tonight? Perhaps, Poirot replied, lifting his teacup delicately. But whether they act or not, the little grey cells must remain vigilant. Observation is our ally. By 11 o'clock, the household had grown quiet. Julian Harrow rested in his room, still recovering from his wound, while Lady Harrow and Dr. Marsh retired to their chambers. Graves patrolled the corridors with a tense watchfulness, though he did not attempt to hide his anxiety. Arthur Mallow had withdrawn to the library, ostensibly to read, but Poirot suspected he was more alert than he pretended. Poirot, however, had no intention of sleeping. He had stationed himself near the main window, overlooking the cliffs and the hidden paths that led to the cellar and greenhouse. A lantern flickered in the hallway, casting faint golden light, but Poirot's gaze remained fixed on the darkness beyond. Hours passed. The wind howled. The tide whispered against the rocks. And then, a shadow. At first, it was subtle, almost imperceptible, a faint movement across the cliff path, just beyond the hedge. Poirot leaned forward, adjusting his monocle. The figure moved deliberately, with the caution of someone familiar with the terrain. A hat or hood concealed the upper features, and a small bundle was carried under one arm. Poirot's mind raced. Someone wishes to retrieve or conceal something. Aha, the game begins anew. He rose silently, retrieving a lantern and a coat. Moving with the cat-like grace of a man who calculated each step, he left the drawing room and made his way toward the back entrance. Graves noticed him. "Monsieur Poirot." "Where are you going at this hour?" he asked, startled. "Observation requires proximity," Poirot replied. "Stay where you are. I must proceed alone." The path to the cliffs was treacherous, narrow, and slick with dew. Poirot moved with extreme care, each step measured, his lantern casting a small circle of light ahead. He followed the faint figure along the winding trail, remaining hidden behind rocks and sparse foliage. The figure paused near the entrance to the cliff cellar, lowering the bundle carefully. Poirot crouched behind a low rock and observed. The bundle was opened, and several vials, similar to the one found on the beach, were carefully arranged on a flat stone. Poirot noted the careful, almost ritualistic manner in which this was done. "This is deliberate," Poirot murmured to himself. "Not merely hiding evidence, but creating an impression. A signature. A statement. The criminal wishes to be observed, indirectly." The figure moved suddenly, glancing toward the manor. Poirot ducked behind the rock, heart steady but adrenaline stirring. A moment later, the figure slipped something into the crate left in the cliff cellar earlier and then vanished into the darkness toward the cliffs above. Poirot waited several minutes to ensure the intruder was truly gone, then approached the crate. He carefully lifted the lid and examined the contents. There were 4 vials, each containing a faintly reddish powder, carefully labeled in handwriting that was meticulous but slightly tremulous. "A nervousness," Poirot whispered. The guilty hand betrays itself even in careful planning. Too many precise actions, and the mind falters. He pocketed one vial for later analysis and photographed the arrangement mentally. Then, moving cautiously, he returned to the manor, each step calculated to avoid leaving traces. Back inside, Poirot was greeted by the faint smell of tea and the warm glow of lamplight. Graves was still on watch, pacing near the main hallway. "Everything in order?" he asked. "Yes, Leonard," Poirot replied. "And yet, the order is false. The chaos is beneath the surface. The guilty mind moves tonight as it did before. We must anticipate its next step." Dr. Marsh entered quietly. "Monsieur Poirot, I thought you were resting." "I do not rest when danger is abroad," Poirot said simply. "It is when others sleep that observation becomes most acute. The guilty often believe darkness conceals them, it does not." Miss Seaborn, who had been lingering in the hall, looked worried. "Monsieur Poirot, do you think Arthur will be harmed again?" "I do not know, mademoiselle," Poirot replied. "But we must prepare, as the mind of the criminal always precedes their actions. An observation allows us to anticipate." He spread the labels from the vials on the table, examining the handwriting carefully. The tremor in the letters suggested urgency and fear. Notice, he murmured, this is no casual perpetrator. They are knowledgeable, meticulous, but anxious. Anxiety is a fingerprint we cannot ignore. Graves frowned. So it could be anyone here in the manor. Indeed, Poirot said. And yet it may also be someone familiar with the village. The cliffs, the cellar, the greenhouse, knowledge of these locations is essential. Our suspect is cunning and mobile, but still human. Every action leaves traces. And the smallest oversight may reveal the truth. He leaned back, his hands folded. Tomorrow, we must confront the situation at the greenhouse and the cliff cellar simultaneously. By presenting evidence in a controlled manner, we shall provoke the guilty party into a mistake. The game is set, the players in position. Patience, Miss Amos, is our greatest weapon. Poirot paused, eyes narrowing. Tonight, however, we observe. The shadows speak to us if we know how to listen. And tonight, the shadows whispered a great deal. The little grey cells are most intrigued. Soon, everything will be revealed. The wind rattled the windows, the tide moaned, and Poirot sat in silence, perfectly still, waiting for the next move. Somewhere in the darkness, the guilty hand was watching, calculating, and perhaps trembling. And Poirot was ready. Chapter 7, The Secret in the Shadows. The morning after the midnight observation, Madder Cove was unnaturally quiet. Even the gulls seemed subdued, their cries distant and hesitant. The cliffs loomed grey and jagged, like silent sentinels keeping watch over secrets yet to be revealed. Poirot awoke early, as always, perfectly groomed, his mind already turning over the events of the previous night. Every detail mattered, the shadow on the cliff path, the tremor in the handwriting, the placement of the vials, and each clue was a piece of the puzzle he was assembling with methodical precision. At breakfast, the household gathered, but tension hung over them like a thick fog. Lady Harrow's usual poise was strained, she poured tea with slightly trembling hands. Julian, still weak but recovering, ate quietly, his eyes darting nervously toward the windows. Dr. Marsh sat upright, composed yet alert, as though anticipating another crisis at any moment. Graves, normally rigid, seemed on edge, his gaze frequently flicking toward the door. Poirot's keen eyes swept over each face, taking in posture, micro-expressions, and the subtle signs of anxiety. He noted how Lady Harrow's fingers twitched when Julian spoke, how Graves' jaw clenched at minor movements, and how Dr. Marsh's pupils dilated slightly when mentioning the cliff cellar. Each observation was stored meticulously in his mind. Monsieur Poirot, Lady Harrow began hesitantly, do you believe the person who tried to harm Arthur is still nearby? Mais oui, madam, Poirot replied. Nearby and watching. Every movement, every decision is calculated. The guilty mind fears discovery, yet desires control. That is why they act indirectly and with precision. Miss Seaborn shifted in her seat. Do you think they will try again today? It is likely, Poirot said calmly, setting down his cup. But the danger is a signal, not a cause for panic. Observation and strategy will prevent harm. The important task is to draw the individual out into error, where they will reveal themselves. Later that morning, Poirot led a small group toward the greenhouse, with Dr. Marsh and Graves accompanying him. Julian remained behind to rest, and Lady Harrow stayed to oversee the household. The journey to the greenhouse was silent except for the crunch of gravel underfoot. Every step Poirot took was deliberate, his lantern-like attention focused on potential signs of disturbance. The greenhouse appeared unchanged at first glance. Soil was disturbed, cabinet locks examined, and sunlight streaming through glass highlighted small details, a faint smear on the floor, a broken leaf from a rare plant, a tiny fragment of crimson fabric caught on the edge of a bench. Poirot crouched, inspecting the fragment closely. Notice, Miss Amos, he whispered, the tear is recent. The thread matches what we found in the cliff cellar. Our culprit is bold, yet leaves traces despite their careful planning. Anxiety betrays even the most meticulous criminal. Dr. Marsh leaned closer. Monsieur Poirot, could this thread be accidental? Could someone have brushed against the bench unknowingly? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Perhaps, madam. Yet observe how the same thread appeared in the cellar, on the cabinet, and near the vials. The probability of coincidence is minuscule. This is deliberate. Graves shifted uncomfortably. But who? Who could have the knowledge, the access, and the daring to move between the manor, the greenhouse, and the cliffs undetected? Poirot's expression softened as he looked toward the window. Someone who knows the manor intimately, someone who has access to both knowledge and trust. And who understands the psychology of those around them. He stepped toward the cabinet, inspecting the lock again. The scratches were shallow but numerous, a subtle record of hesitation. Poirot removed the lockbox and examined its empty interior. He noted faint fingerprints that suggested the individual had been wearing gloves, yet the gloves had been thin and worn, allowing partial impressions. "Observe," he said, "caution, yes, but not perfection. Human nervousness leaves indelible marks." As they continued to inspect, a sudden sound echoed from outside, a hurried, muffled step. All three froze. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A movement," he murmured. "Someone approaches." They moved silently to the door. Beyond the glass, a figure darted from shadow to shadow near the side path. Poirot recognized the gait immediately, deliberate, yet familiar. He held up a hand. "Wait. Patience, Miss Amos." The figure paused, crouched near a small crate, and began to tamper with the contents. Poirot's voice cut through the stillness like a knife. "Monsieur or madam, I believe you are mistaken if you think yourself unseen." The figure froze, then attempted to retreat, but Poirot stepped into the path with calm authority. "No need for haste. I merely wish to converse." A young woman emerged, face pale but defiant. It was Miss Lillian Seaborn herself. She raised her hands instinctively, as if to ward off accusation. "Monsieur Poirot, I—" Poirot raised a finger, not to scold, but to explain. "Mademoiselle, remain calm. Observation does not accuse, it clarifies. You were here at night, moving between the cliff cellar and the greenhouse. Pray, explain your actions." She hesitated, then spoke rapidly. I was searching for Arthur. I suspected something. I saw the figure near the cliff cellar and wanted to help, to prevent harm. I only moved the vials to a safer place." Poirot's expression softened. Courage, yes. But deception is dangerous. Even with the best of intentions, misinterpretation is inevitable. Your fear led you to act covertly, and thus, inadvertently, you appear suspect. Graves stepped forward, confused. But if she wasn't responsible, then who is? Poirot's gaze swept over the greenhouse, lingering on subtle details, a disturbed plant here, a smear of red clay there, the slight displacement of soil near the back path. "Our adversary," he said, voice low and deliberate, "is clever. They use shadows, misdirection, and the intervention of others to shield themselves. But all action leaves traces, and the traces of our criminal are still present." Dr. Marsh frowned. "Monsieur Poirot, what do you propose next?" Poirot smiled faintly. "We shall observe more closely, and we shall set a trap. Every person in this manor is, knowingly or unknowingly, a part of the stage. The criminal believes they control the scene. But the little grey cells, Miss Amos, control the outcome." Later, as evening fell, Poirot convened a private session with Lady Harrow, Julian, Mallow, and Dr. Marsh. he spread before them a collection of evidence, the torn scrap of paper, the red thread, vials from the cliff cellar, and even the painting of the cliffs. Each item was examined meticulously, with Poirot pointing out its significance. "The pattern is clear," he said, voice precise. "The adversary is calculating, knowledgeable of Madder Cove's terrain, and familiar with our movements. The deliberate placement of objects and the use of fear as a weapon demonstrates their cunning. And yet, every meticulous act has left an opening. Small, yes, but enough for those who observe keenly." Julian's voice trembled. "So you know who it is?" Poirot gave a small, enigmatic smile. "Not yet. But soon. The net is being drawn. Our criminal is already planning the next move, unaware that each decision is observed, catalogued, and interpreted. Patience, Miss Amos. The hour of revelation approaches." Outside, the sea churned and the cliffs loomed like dark sentinels. Within the manor, tension coiled like a spring, each heartbeat echoing the silent anticipation of what was to come. Poirot, seated with hands clasped, eyes sharp and unblinking, was ready for the final threads to unravel. The shadows held secrets, and he intended to illuminate them all. Chapter 8: The Unveiling of the Tide. The day dawned with a brittle chill, the sun rising pale and unsympathetic over Madder Cove. The sea lashed at the cliffs with renewed vigor, waves breaking in foamy cascades that echoed like whispers of warning. Inside Harrowden Hall, the tension was palpable. The household assembled in the drawing room, a quiet anxiety threading each movement, each cautious glance. Even the wind seemed to pause, as though waiting for the final act. Hercule Poirot stood by the fireplace, his posture impeccable, moustache waxed to a flawless curve, eyes gleaming with that calm intensity that always foretold revelation. The little grey cells, he knew, had assembled the puzzle into near completion. All that remained was the unveiling. "Miss Amos," he began, voice gentle yet commanding, "we are at the culmination of our investigation. The events of the past days, Lord Harrow's murder, Julian's assault, the missing vials of Madder's vein, the torn paper, the crimson threads, and the shadows on the cliffs, are pieces of a grand design. And tonight, the design shall be revealed." He turned to Julian, who watched him with apprehensive eyes. "Monsieur, your courage has been admirable. But courage alone does not reveal the truth. Observation, reasoning, and calm judgment will." Lady Harrow's hands trembled slightly as she set a teacup down. "Monsieur Poirot, who is responsible for all this?" "Patience, madam," Poirot said. "We shall see. But first, let us recount the facts, as any detective worth his salt must." He moved gracefully to the side table, lifting the scrap of paper recovered from Julian's hand during the cliff cellar incident. This note, "Cliff cellar," was our first true clue. It directed us to the hidden crate and vials, deliberately placed by someone with both knowledge and intent. Then there was the crimson thread, appearing both here in the greenhouse and at the cliff cellar. Subtle, yet unmistakable, a signature. Whether intentional or by accident of anxiety. Dr. Marsh nodded. "And the vials, they were all Madder's vein compounds, correct?" "Yes," Poirot said. "Highly toxic if mishandled. A perfect instrument for intimidation, or worse. But the vials were never intended for use, their very placement was meant to mislead. The criminal sought to create fear, to distract from the true motive, and perhaps to misdirect suspicion." He turned to Mallow. "Arthur, the painting you brought to our attention, the one created by Nina Crestwell, was more revealing than anyone realized. It captured, unconsciously, the moment of confrontation near the cliffs. Two figures in heated discussion. One leaning forward aggressively, the other recoiling, precisely the dynamic of our culprit and Arthur." Mallow's eyes widened. "But who? Who could it be?" Poirot gestured to the assembled group. The guilty party had access to the manor, knowledge of the cliffs, familiarity with Lord Harrow's research, and, most importantly, the ability to manipulate the household into misjudging events. They could act while others were distracted, yet left traces, small, anxious gestures, errors in careful planning. These traces, Miss Amos, reveal more than any confession. He paused, letting the suspense settle. And now, the decisive moment. He turned, eyes locking on Dr. Evelyn Marsh. The physician's composure wavered slightly. Poirot's tone was gentle, almost conversational. "Dr. Marsh," he said, "you are learned, intelligent, and clever. You had access to the laboratory, to the vials, to Julian's room. You understood the properties of Madder's vein and the dangers it posed. You were concerned for Arthur, yes, but also for the consequences of his discovery. And you feared exposure." A sharp intake of breath. Dr. Marsh's eyes darted, her hands tightening unconsciously. "Oh, monsieur," she whispered. Poirot nodded. "And that is why you moved the vials at night, leaving traces to mislead. That is why you attempted to frighten Julian, to ensure he would reveal what he knew without putting your reputation or ambitions at risk. But your anxiety betrayed you. The thread, the tremulous handwriting on the labels, the hurried placement of vials, they were all signs. You underestimated the observation of Hercule Poirot." Lady Harrow gasped. "Dr. Marsh, no." Dr. Marsh's lips pressed together. You cannot prove." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, but proof is not merely accusation. Observe, Miss Amos. The footprint near the cliff cellar, narrow and careful, female, yes, and consistent with Dr. Marsh's shoes. The vials she carried, only someone familiar with their weight and properties could handle them with such precision. And the final signature, the painting's unconscious capture of your confrontation, is irrefutable. You acted with knowledge and fear always betrays itself." Dr. Marsh's composure collapsed. She sank into a chair, face pale. "It was for the research. I could not allow Lord Harrow's discovery to be misused, and Julian, he misunderstood." Poirot inclined his head. "Ah, the classic justification of the guilty, noble motive, yet criminal action. You misjudged the hearts of those around you, and you underestimated the acuity of observation. And thus, your carefully orchestrated plan unraveled." Julian, still weak, whispered, "All this, for the plant." "Yes," Poirot said gently. "But not the plant itself. The secret within its properties, the potential for power or prestige. That is what drove fear, and fear drives crime more surely than greed alone." Mallow leaned back, astonished. "And the vial on the beach?" Poirot held up the small glass container. "A warning. You wished to test whether your presence would be discovered, whether others would notice your movements. The child's discovery was accidental. The tide, as always, reveals the truth in its own time." Lady Harrow turned to Dr. Marsh. How could you?" Dr. Marsh lowered her head. "I was desperate. I feared ruin and scandal. I never meant for anyone to be hurt, truly." Poirot's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. "Intent is important, but so are consequences. One cannot act in secrecy and expect the world to remain untouched." He stood, folding his hands. "And so, the mystery of Madder Cove is resolved. The hidden cellar, the vials, the torn paper, the crimson thread, the midnight movements, all are accounted for. The tide whispers, the cliffs conceal, and yet, the little grey cells pierce the shadows. Observation, reasoning, and calm deliberation reveal all." Graves let out a breath he had been holding. "It's over." Poirot smiled faintly. "Oh, Leonard. Justice, truth, and order are restored. And the lessons remain, even the cleverest hand leaves a trace, and the human heart always betrays itself in fear or anxiety. Outside, the wind softened, and the sea seemed to settle. The fog lifted from the cliffs, revealing the jagged rocks in the clarity of morning light. Madder Cove, ever mysterious, returned to its quiet vigil, the waves carrying away secrets, but leaving one eternal truth: Poirot's mind had seen what others could not. Lady Harrow approached him, a mixture of relief and gratitude in her eyes. "Monsieur Poirot, how can we ever thank you?" Poirot bowed slightly, a hint of a smile in his eyes. "Madam, the satisfaction of truth is reward enough. And let this be a lesson to all: the mind, disciplined and attentive, is the finest instrument we possess. The little grey cells, Miss Amos, do not rest, and neither should we, when justice is at stake." Julian, recovering, looked at Poirot with awe. "You saw everything, from the threads to the vials to the painting." "Incredible." Poirot merely nodded. "Observation, deduction, patience. And above all, attention to the smallest details. The tides, the cliffs, the shadows, they all speak. One only must listen." And with that, Hercule Poirot, ever elegant, ever precise, returned to his reflections, satisfied that the mystery of Madder Cove was finally, completely, resolved. The secret of Madder's vein, the machinations of fear, and the treachery hidden in plain sight, all had been unveiled. The tide whispered its last warning, and the cliffs kept their watch in silent acknowledgement of the little grey cell's triumph.